Last year, OnePlus launched the OnePlus 7T, and it was a little confusing because the OnePlus 7T offered so many of the things that made the OnePlus 7 Pro great. They also launched the OnePlus 7T Pro, and it really didn't improve on the OnePlus 7 Pro all that much. All it really had besting the OnePlus 7T was a higher resolution display and a slightly bigger battery. We actually called the OnePlus 7T too good because it didn't really make sense to buy the OnePlus 7T Pro when the OnePlus 7T was that good. And now we're here. This is the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro, and I think they represent what the OnePlus 7T Pro should have been in the first place. And you can pretty much immediately see that from the design. Aside from the color, the designs of the OnePlus 8 and 8 Pro are really similar to the OnePlus 7 Pro. Usually year over year, iteration over iteration, OnePlus definitely refines the designs of their phone and makes them a little bit different. But the OnePlus 7T Pro looked almost identical to the OnePlus 7 Pro. The OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro kind of evolve on that design by forcing a more modern look. They're less overtly rounded and they're a little bit more narrow and taller. Really, the form factor feels a lot like the Oppo Find X2 Pro. Even the camera arrays on these two phones look really similar to the OnePlus 7 Pro and OnePlus 7T Pro. But of course, the OnePlus 8 Pro has a few extra sensors that we're gonna talk about. Now, the screen of these phones is where things start to diverge a little bit more. They're using the hole punch cutout display instead of that pop-up camera, and personally, I really like hole punch displays. I know that can be controversial, but they're about the same size as a notification, and it doesn't take up that much more visual space, so I'm a fan. Now, the OnePlus 8 is using an FHD Plus 90Hz panel, while the OnePlus 8 Pro is using a 120Hz QHD Plus panel. So this is another way that OnePlus is trying to separate the two products. The screens are also a little bit less curved, which is nice, but I still had some issues with palm rejection. So if you're just holding the phone normally, sometimes it would register you as scrolling up and down on the display just because you were touching the edge of the phone. I think OnePlus could probably improve this in software, but we don't review phones based on future promises. Now, that being said, the quality of these panels is really good, especially on the OnePlus 8 Pro. In our independent testing, it had some of the best color accuracy that we've seen across all the smartphones that we've tested in the last year. That's really, really good. Now, okay, in the last couple of years, OnePlus has started to move away from the flagship killer mantra, and they've started to move towards fast and smooth. They want the OnePlus 8 Pro to compete directly with the Galaxy S20 Plus. Before, they used to ignore things like wireless charging and IP ratings and even NFC at one point because it would keep costs down. But with the OnePlus 8 Pro, they're kind of going all in at the expense of, well, expense. And like I said before, they need to give people a reason to spend that extra money on the OnePlus 8 Pro over the standard OnePlus 8. Now, from a raw specs perspective, these phones are fairly similar, but they actually do differ in a number of other areas. So let's talk about what these phones have in common, and then we'll talk about how they're different. Both the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 8 Pro are using the Snapdragon 865 with the Qualcomm X55 5G modem. They're also using 8 to 12 gigabytes of RAM and 128 to 256 gigabytes of storage. So from a raw power perspective, they are the same and they're quite fast. I did notice a little bit of an issue in multitasking. I would get this weird jittering when I was switching between apps. Now again, this is another software problem that OnePlus could probably fix in software, but it's kind of annoying to see in a super high-end flagship phone, which the OnePlus 8 Pro is now. And of course, both phones are running on Oxygen OS 10, which is based on Android 10. Oxygen OS is a really, really nice OS. It's super streamlined and very minimal. It really only adds a few extra things that are actually fairly useful, like a gaming mode, a reading mode, and they've also got something called Zen mode, which forces you to stop using your phone for a while. And I think we all kind of need that. The OnePlus 8 has a 4,300 mAh battery, and the OnePlus 8 Pro has a 4,510 mAh battery. And that doesn't seem that different. But of course, the OnePlus 8 Pro is using that QHD Plus 120Hz display, and the OnePlus 8 is using that FHD Plus 90Hz display. And that makes a pretty decent difference. Now, overall, the phone's actually got pretty good battery life. On the OnePlus 8 Pro, I was getting about a day and a half worth of battery life. Now, I did test this for multiple days, one on data only and one one on Wi-Fi only because of course we're all stuck in our apartments right now. And it still got about a day and a quarter to a day and a half of battery life. That's pretty good. The OnePlus 8 got a little bit better battery life because of that 90 Hz and FHD Plus display versus the 120 Hz QHD Plus display. Considering the OnePlus 7T didn't have very good battery life and neither did the OnePlus 7 Pro, it's really nice to see better battery life in these devices. Now the camera systems are another big area where these phones really differ. The OnePlus 8 is using the 48 megapixel Sony IMX586 from last year. It's using a 16 megapixel wide angle camera and a 2 megapixel macro camera, whereas the OnePlus 8 Pro is using the new Sony IMX689 from the Oppo Find X2 Pro. It's using that 48 megapixel Sony IMX586 for the wide angle sensor, and then it's also got a 3x telephoto sensor. Now this is an optical telephoto sensor. It's actually a 12 megapixel camera that outputs 8 megapixel images, and it's just kind of cropping to get that difference. Now I would have rather seen a telephoto sensor in this phone, but a little bit more on that later. Now the OnePlus 8 Pro is also introducing this new color filter camera, which is nothing more than a gimmick, but I'll talk about that more later. The camera system in the OnePlus 8 doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's got the same main and wide cameras from the OnePlus 7T. It's got a dedicated 2 megapixel macro camera, whereas the OnePlus 7T had a telephoto camera and just a separate macro mode. I mean, the OnePlus 7 Pro had a 3x optical telephoto camera, and this one doesn't have optical telephoto at all. It's just kind of weird and seems like a little bit of a downgrade. Now meanwhile, the Pro has that new Sony IMX689 sensor from the Find X2 Pro, which has really good white balance and low light performance. Dynamic range seemed pretty good in my unit too, although my friend Eber Anthony from Hardware Connects told me that his unit had kind of spotty dynamic range, so watch out for that. The wide angle camera is pretty good as well. It doesn't have quite as good color, but it's getting there and it looks pretty similar to the regular main sensor. And the telephoto sensor is, again, a 12 megapixel sensor that always outputs 8 megapixel images by cropping. And this is kind of weird too, because I would have preferred to see an optical 3x telephoto sensor here. And the phone can zoom up to 30x, but because it's already cropping down to 8x, it kind of loses resolution pretty quickly when you start cropping more and more. Now that being said, it is still better than like the 50 or 100x zoom that we're gonna see in other phones like the Galaxy S20 Ultra, but of course that's because it's not actually zooming to 100 times, you're just staying at 30. The last camera that OnePlus has put on the OnePlus 8 Pro is called the color filter camera, and this is used for one very specific filter within the OnePlus 8 Pro's camera app. The filter is called photochrome, and traditionally, photochrome is a method in which you can take black and white negatives and sort of colorize them. Now, OnePlus is basically altering the spectrum of light that is coming through the lens and then hitting the sensor with this filter. And the interesting thing about this is it can detect different frequencies. So for example, if I'm holding up my lens here, the lens cap and also the lens hood are both black as well as the body. But the camera can detect the body as being metal and the hood and the cap as being plastic. So it shows the metal as being this copper sepia tone, and it shows the hood and the cap as being black. Now, this is really interesting for sure. Like, it's cool to be able to separate materials with your phone, but I don't see why OnePlus would add dedicated hardware for that kind of thing in a traditional consumer device. This seems really cool for like material scientists, but I don't really understand the point for regular people. Now, if OnePlus really wanted to shave off price, they probably could have just avoided putting that camera in altogether, and we could have saved at least like $25. But there's some good news. Both of these phones use 16 megapixel selfie cameras, and they're very, very good. I really like the color and contrast and dynamic range in both of them, and I was really happy with the results overall. So how else is OnePlus differentiating these devices? Well, wireless charging and IP rating, sort of. Let's start with wireless charging. OnePlus has finally added wireless charging to the OnePlus 8 Pro. This is a feature that we have been asking for years. I feel like every single time a T phone was about to come out, we would say, maybe this is the point in which OnePlus adds wireless charging to these phones. But no, we now just finally got it in the OnePlus 8 Pro. Now, this does work with regular Qi charging pads, but OnePlus has also introduced a 30-watt charging pad that they're calling Warp Charge 30 Wireless. And this is really, really fast for wireless charging, especially in the United States. We just didn't have wireless charging this quick before then. Now, of course, in like Europe and China and different regions, there are faster wireless charging standards, but 30 watts, especially in the United States, is very fast. OnePlus says that the wireless charger can charge your phone to 50% in 30 minutes. So we tested this, and in 30 minutes, we actually got 56%, which is a little bit better than what OnePlus was rating. So that's really nice to see. Now, the Warp Charge 30T charger does have a fan built onto it because you're pumping a lot of power through the air, and it is audible, although it's still really, really quiet, but there is a bedtime mode in case you want to turn off the fan while you're sleeping, and it'll just reduce the wattage. Now, this phone also has reverse wireless charging, which is nice, but it's pretty slow. It's 3 watts. The Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus has 9-watt reverse wireless charging, just to give you a little bit of a comparison. So you could charge like some truly wireless headphones on this thing, but I wouldn't charge another phone. That's gonna take a while. I'm really happy to see wireless charging finally getting adopted in OnePlus phones. I didn't really used to care about wireless charging, but recently we've adopted a number of wireless charging pads around our house, and it's been really convenient for just setting phones down and walking away. Now let's talk about that IP rating. The OnePlus 8 Pro has IP68 water and dust resistance certification. The OnePlus 8 does if you buy it at a carrier, but it's not going to say it on OnePlus.com. I couldn't really get an answer as to why this is. I was just basically told that the carriers wanted to have it so that they tested it and put it on the phones on their website. It's very confusing, but otherwise, if you buy these phones on OnePlus.com, they're obviously going to say that they certified it in the way that they've always certified OnePlus devices, which is basically splash resistance. So I guess the question comes down to, would I actually recommend these phones and the price? Well, the OnePlus 8 Pro cost $899 and the OnePlus 8 costs $699. And these are definitely some of the most expensive phones OnePlus has ever made if you omit those fringe McLaren editions. But say you compare the OnePlus 8 Pro to the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus. That's still $300 cheaper than that device, and it offers a lot of the same things and then some. Obviously, you're not getting everything that the S20 Plus offers, but it is a very competitive option for $300 less. As far as the OnePlus 8 is concerned, it's a little bit harder for me to recommend because OnePlus is still selling the OnePlus 7T and the OnePlus 7 Pro at $499. And at $200 less than this phone, those are really compelling options. All you're really getting out of the OnePlus 8 compared to those phones is the 865 and 5G. And unless you really need those things, I feel like I would just go with the OnePlus 7T instead. Also, if you buy the OnePlus 8 at Verizon, it's gonna be an additional $100 because they're adding the 5G millimeter wave bands. Unless you live right in front of a 5G millimeter wave node, it doesn't make a lot of sense to get a millimeter wave phone. The OnePlus 8 Pro, on the other hand, makes a lot more sense in this case. It's got more things like the 120Hz QHD+ display, 30-watt wireless charging, regular IP68 water resistance, all these little tidbits that kind of make it competitive versus something like the Galaxy S20 Plus. And I get that $900 is a ton of money, especially for a OnePlus phone, but that Snapdragon 865 and X55 modem are really expensive components. I mean, even Xiaomi is selling the Xiaomi Mi 10 Pro for 999 euros. That's one of the most expensive phones they've ever released. And personally, I do prefer the OnePlus 7 Pro over the Galaxy S20 Plus, so saving $300 is pretty convenient. But ultimately, that's up to you and the experience that you prefer. Anyways, guys, that's about it for the OnePlus 8, OnePlus 8 Pro. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The phone landscape's getting really weird, especially with these really expensive processors jacking up the price of pretty much every phone on the market right now. So, till next time, I'll catch you in the next video.